Histobiograph.
In the shimmering marble halls of ancient Alexandria, where philosophers debated beneath painted ceilings and priests whispered to gods sculpted in gold, a little girl learned that love was not safety. It was currency. Her name was Arsinoe II, a princess, a pawn, and eventually, a queen who made monsters look tame. Her story begins not with romance or power, but with violation. Not with ascension, but with betrayal. She was born into the royal house of the Ptolemies, a dynasty birthed in conquest, bathed in blood, and crowned with incest. A family so desperate to preserve their power, they devoured their own. They say power corrupts. But what happens when corruption is the very foundation of your childhood? When your father is your first predator? When your husband is your assassin? When your brother becomes your lover? And when the only way to survive is to become more ruthless than the men who destroyed you? This is not a myth. These are the chronicles carved in broken tablets and whispered by forgotten historians. This is the story of how one woman, traumatized, manipulated, and weaponized, helped create a kingdom, then infected its bloodline for generations. Her name was Arsinoe, and her crown was not made of gold. It was made of ashes, blood, and silence. Before she was a queen, she was a gift wrapped in silence and sent to another man's bed. At barely 15, Arsinoe was told she would marry a king, but not the king of her land, not of her blood. She was sent to Lysimachus, an aging general who ruled over Thrace and Macedonia, a kingdom as cold and jagged as the mountains surrounding it. To the Egyptian court, this was diplomacy. To her father, it was a transaction. And to Arsinoe, it was the first of many exiles. Lysimachus already had sons. He had mistresses. He had no need for a wife, except as a tool to forge alliance with Egypt. She wasn't there to be loved. She was there to breed. She gave him children, but they would never rule. Because Lysimachus had an older son, Agathocles. To secure the future for her own sons, Arsinoe turned to the only thing she had been taught: charm, intrigue, elimination. Historians whispered that she began sowing rumors, subtle accusations, whispered poison. Agathocles, once beloved, became suspect. And when the accusations reached Lysimachus' ears, it was too late for mercy. Agathocles was executed for treason. But treason to whom? To the throne? Or to the woman who wanted it for her sons? It worked, briefly, until Lysimachus died in battle, and everything fell apart. Thrace turned hostile. Macedonia rejected her children's claims. So Arsinoe fled with her sons and did the unthinkable. She married Ptolemy I, her half-brother. She thought she was returning to blood. But blood was what he wanted to spill. Within months, Cyrannus accused her eldest son of plotting rebellion. The boy was dragged into the square and publicly executed. Another was poisoned. The youngest simply vanished. Some say drowned, others say sold. No body was ever found. And Arsinoe, this daughter of gods, stood in court with a straight spine and an empty womb. She had lost everything: her husband, her sons, even the illusion of protection by blood. But what died in Thrace was not just her family. It was her belief in redemption, in justice, in anything but the merciless math of power. From this day forward, she would never be anyone's pawn again. She would never trust love, or blood, or mercy. She would return to Egypt, not as a daughter, but as a weapon. She fled covered in blood. She returned dressed like a goddess. When Arsinoe set foot back in Egypt, she was no longer the girl who had once left in a bridal litter. She returned not as a wife, not as a mother, but as a phantom of everything the dynasty had tried to erase. The court expected a broken woman. What they saw was something else. Eyes sharpened by loss, smiles sculpted in marble, and a voice that had learned the rhythm of command. She asked for nothing, but one by one, those who stood in her way vanished. Whispers began to surface. Those who remembered her past, her exile, her sons, her shame, were removed. Some died in hunting accidents. Some retired mysteriously. Some were found floating in the Nile. No one dared to ask if it was her doing, because no one wanted to be next. She knew Egypt, knew its people, knew how to make myth out of murder. So she approached Ptolemy II, her full brother, already king, already married, and convinced him to do the unthinkable. He divorced his wife and married Arsinoe, his sister, his divine equal. The court gasped. The temples faltered. But the people? They rejoiced. Because she didn't return as a widow. She returned as Isis reborn. The ritual was televised to the ancient world. Scrolls were copied. Statues erected. Priests proclaimed it divine law. Incest was no longer a rumor. It was a commandment. Brother and sister, king and queen, god and goddess. And those who objected were crushed under the wheels of sacred unity. What began as survival was now a doctrine. Arsinoe oversaw military campaigns, trade policies, temple appointments. Her image appeared on coins, equal in size to the king's. She was no longer just part of the dynasty. She was the dynasty. And yet, in every whispered prayer from the servants, in every sideways glance from the priests, in every shadow of the palace she ruled, the ghosts of her children still walked. The blood she spilled still lingered beneath her sandals. But she had learned the final lesson of divine rule. To rule as a god, one must first kill the human inside. She didn't whisper her sins. She built temples out of them. Arsinoe's new identity didn't need to be hidden. She didn't bury her crimes. She legalized them. Incest became doctrine. Murder became sacrifice. And trauma became policy. Under her rule, sibling marriage became a hallmark of Ptolemaic legitimacy. Not just tolerated, but celebrated. From palaces in Memphis to temples in Thebes, the same story was etched in stone. The divine couple, joined in sacred blood, bring balance to the cosmos. But behind every myth was a mutilated body. Behind every law was a lie carved from grief. The priests called her Thea Philadelphos, the goddess who loves her brother. But they never told the people how many children had died so she could bear that name. How many rival queens had been erased. How many versions of herself she had to kill to keep the mask in place. And in the quiet corners of the palace, where no decree could reach, the walls remembered. One maid swore she heard the queen speak to no one in the night, asking a name that no longer existed. One eunuch claimed he once saw her crying into a pile of old children's clothes before setting them on fire. But no one dared record that version of the queen. History only remembers the statues, the wars, the laws she signed in golden ink. If survival demands the destruction of everything human in you, are you still alive? She wrote no confessions, left no diaries, but she didn't have to. Her entire dynasty was the confession, because what Arsinoe birthed was not just a political machine. It was a culture of ritualized cruelty. The Ptolemaic dynasty after her followed her lead, brother after sister, aunt after nephew, niece after uncle, until, eventually, a girl named Cleopatra would be born, not as a queen in waiting, but as the final echo of Arsinoe's legacy, a girl destined to fall for the sins of someone she never met. When gods bleed, it is their children who are born cursed. They say history is written by the victors. But what happens when the victors are erased and only the curses remain? The dynasty Arsinoe helped build would last for nearly 3 centuries. It would shape the politics of Hellenistic Egypt. It would elevate incest from scandal to state religion. It would teach daughters to trust their fathers and fear their brothers. And in its final breath, it would give the world Cleopatra VII, the last queen of Egypt. Beautiful, brilliant, but doomed. Cleopatra did not invent royal incest. She inherited it. She did not corrupt the throne. She was born from its corruption. By the time she ruled, the bloodline had been folded, twisted, and recycled so many times that madness, paranoia, and genetic decay were no longer accidents. They were tradition. And somewhere beneath that tangled web still lingered the ghost of Arsinoe II, the first queen to embrace the curse, to carve trauma into law, to sanctify her own undoing. Because what Arsinoe created was never just about power. It was about control over memory. She rewrote her story, reframed her shame as myth, erased her victims beneath marble, and taught future queens that obedience to the throne was worth any sacrifice, even their soul. So the next time you hear of a goddess queen, wrapped in silk, riding beside her brother king, worshipped as divine, remember this. She may not be ruling, she may not be breathing, but she may still be watching. From beneath the Nile, from behind the mask, from inside every story they told you was beautiful, but began in blood. A candle flickers out in an ancient archive. Dust swirls over forgotten scrolls. Faint whispers echo through stone halls. A voice rises, inviting you to remember what history tried to silence.